Hello everybody, you join me here today at the secret workshop of Toyota and Lexus GB, where they store and maintain both the current press fleet and also a number of heritage vehicles. For various boring reasons, I can't actually show you much of what's in here today, but I can tell you this is a very large room filled with incredibly exciting machinery. And because I've built up a very good relationship with the company over the last few years, a little while ago they contacted me and said, "James, we really like what you do. If ever there's anything in here you'd like to have a play with, please just let us know." So I said, "Oh yes, there is something I would rather like to get my hands on." Naturally, I said, "Yes please, I would love to drive the LFA." And they said, "James, you can drive anything you want." Yes, the LFA. Anything you want. Okay, fine, I get the message. As it happens, there is actually a vehicle kept here which I think is equally as exciting and in some ways even more innovative than this. And that's what we're going to talk about now. This is a Toyota Mirai, and right about now you're probably thinking, I've lost my marbles. How can this in any way, shape or form compare to the mighty LFA? Well, as far as I'm concerned, it can, because under here you will not find a place to put petrol. You definitely won't find a place to put diesel or even electricity, because this car is powered by a hydrogen fuel cell. Yep, many of you have asked me about hydrogen cars, and the truth is I know next to nothing about them, including this one. So I'm going to hand you over to a man that does.
Now, the thing to say about the Mirai is that it's an electric car, but not in the traditional sense of the word. The electricity that powers the Mirai's motors does not come from a big battery that sits underneath the car. The electricity that powers the Mirai is generated under the bonnet. There are 330 small fuel cells, and this is where the magic happens. So the hydrogen is fed into the fuel cell unit where it combines with oxygen. The voltage that is created by that reaction is then boosted in this converter here and fed to the electric motors that drive the rear wheels of the car. We're talking 170 horsepower, about 300 Newton meters torque. The car is perfectly balanced on its new platform. There's a near 50-50 weight distribution front to rear. It's a rear-wheel drive car. When you drive this, you will appreciate just how smooth, refined, quiet and balanced it is. It's an electric saloon powered by hydrogen. Compared to the first Mirai that came out in 2015, this is all new. The platform has allowed the powertrain to be completely repackaged. The powertrain itself is half the size and weight of that powertrain in the first Mirai, so you can appreciate how the technology has moved on. It means that we've been able to position that fuel cell unit under the bonnet rather than underneath the car. One thing that you're probably wondering about the hydrogen that goes in to this flap here is where it's stored. Now, there are 3 fuel tanks on the Mirai, 2 at the rear going across the car, and then one long one running down the centre of the car. The carbon weave is 30% thinner than it was on the original Mirai, which has enabled us to house an additional tank. What's that done apart from weight distribution? It's given us an extra 100 miles of range. So whereas the first Mirai could travel up to 300 miles on its tank of hydrogen, the new car can travel up to 400. There are no emissions on a Mirai. Well, that's not quite true. There is one emission, and that is pure water. Yes, you can buy one, with caveats. We have 10 or 12 fueling stations open. We wouldn't want to sell you a Mirai unless you lived and worked within range of those fueling stations. Germany, another matter, over 100 there, different kettle of fish. But in the UK, yes, you can buy this car. This is the top spec £66,000 version. Here's a marker of Toyota's commitment to hydrogen fuel cell technology. When this new car came out, Akio Toyoda, our boss in Japan, made the commitment that globally this new car would be available for at least a 20% lower price than that first Mirai. So yes, you can buy a variant of Mirai with slightly less fancy kit on it for £49,995.
A big thank you to David there for agreeing to be on camera. It's never as easy as it looks. So, under the skin we have some rather revolutionary stuff. What about the rest of the car? This is spun off the same platform that underpins the current Lexus LS. So it's rather nice, lots of leather and stuff in here, although not quite as opulent as you would expect from the full Lexus flagship. There are things you'd recognise from other Toyota hybrid products, like the little gear selector down here has the same layout as you'd find in, say, a Prius. But remember, as David said, this essentially is an electric car. The hydrogen generates the electricity, it does not drive the wheels. The company is also looking into other hydrogen-based technology using combustion engines, so essentially hydrogen as a fuel directly. Those, they say, have the greatest potential in racing, where lower overall emissions is going to be a priority, and that's an environment where hydrogen fuel cell or regular BEV, full battery car technology, isn't really applicable. As it happens, the real surprise about this car, and one of the reasons I was so keen to feature it, is that despite all of the stuff going on, which is rather unusual, the rest of it is not. Inside there is almost nothing to give away what powers this vehicle, save for a few things. Up here, next to the logo for the car, you've got a button that says H2O, and that purges all the collected water from the car. Quite how it does that, I don't know. In my head, I've got a sort of, railway toilet sort of system of just a load of water being dumped on the floor. But I suspect it may be a little bit more elegant. The dash, which is kind of disappointingly small for a car of this type, also has a different way of calculating fuel economy. It's not enough to have to know mpg, litres per 100 kilometres, and now, of course, kilowatts per miles travelled either. This gives you kilograms per 100 kilometres. I've done 1.25. I don't know if that's good or not. Up here, you've also got a very interesting screen which shows you about the air purification system. The clever boffins that built this thing have put a little system into the car that means the air which passes through it gets filtered, and many of the particulates in it get collected. The net result is that, in theory, and there is science behind this, the air coming out the back of the car can actually be considerably cleaner and better than the air going in. And to show you just how well you've done for the planet, this car even gives you a figure of how many people's worth of air you have scrubbed. I don't know the exact metric, but there's 180 of them. In fact, when you're driving this car, you are cleaning the equivalent of sometimes thousands of litres of air a minute. It's really quite cool. It's not a royal flush though, because in the back, headroom is very limited. If you're sort of 5'6" or so, it won't be a problem. But even for me at 5'10", I have apparently a freakishly tall torso. It is a bit of a struggle. The twin sunroof arrangement probably isn't helping. The boot's also not a great size for a car of this kind, but many luxury cars are often a little bit disappointing in that regard, and it's not exactly tiny. So, that's the car. What's it like to drive? Well, it's a car. It drives in more or less the same way as any other electric vehicle that I've ever experienced. The power, 170 horses, may sound somewhat pathetic for something that weighs the thick end of 2 tons, but it's actually perfectly adequate. Even at motorway speeds, you want to sort of get from 60 to 70 or so when you're on a slip road, it's pretty good. Certainly for driving around town and all that sort of stuff, it works really well. And that's an area where hybrids often do suffer, because the electric motor and combustion engine are kind of trying to work out who wants to do the job. But with this, it's only one way of getting power to the ground, and that's from the electric motor. Simples. Because Toyota haven't had to find anywhere to stuff a huge amount of batteries, it also means you sit at the same height you would expect to in a car like this, which is very refreshing. The accelerator pedal is nicely judged, the brakes are very smooth, progressive, the steering is nicely weighted, but it doesn't really have much feel or feedback. If you were judging this as a regular car, you would say, yep, it's very good, doesn't particularly set your heart on fire, but it does the job. We're coming up to a set of lights now, and I'll be able to give you a rough idea of the kind of acceleration you can expect from the Mirai. Our other competitor is a BMW X6. Who wants to cut across me? Of course he does. So, right, out your way, 40, 50, there we go, and it's a 50 limit, so I can't really go any quicker than that. It's brisk, it does the job. He's probably going to the golf club. One way you can tell that this car is related to the Lexus LS is in the ride quality. It's excellent. Not perfect, the rough imperfections do challenge it a little bit. I don't think there's anything particularly complicated going on with the suspension here, but it's still very cosseting, very pleasant. The steering too, though not well beating, when you do get up to speed, does have a nice sense of weight to it, does reassure you. I like it when cars do that, particularly heavier ones, gives you the sort of sense of the kind of vehicle that you are piloting. Visibility is decent, forward is okay. This B-pillar is a little bit intrusive, but the wing mirrors are nice and big, oddly big actually, with some weird stuff going on below them, and they give you plenty of view behind you. Rear visibility is okay, though your rear 3/4 over there is excellent, thanks to the huge amount of glass in the side of the car. This being at heart an EV, all of the power and all of the torque is available all of the time. Oh my god, that's amazing. Over there, you have Bell & Colville, now known as Lotus Surrey. They're currently refitting for their new corporate identity. All Lotus dealers soon are going to look a little bit like that. In case you want to buy a Lotus, they're the people you want to speak to. The car is sized relatively nicely for driving around the back lanes and stuff. It's not daunting. It does the job well. So then, an unremarkable car to drive with some very remarkable technology. Why then should you buy one? And more importantly, who should be buying it? That is a very interesting question, and it took me a little while to work it out. I'm sure a lot of you are currently thinking, well, if the car is essentially like an EV to drive, why don't you just get an EV? Why go through all the drama of struggling to find one of the very few hydrogen filling points currently available? I get your concern. At this present point in time, for the majority of customers, a straight up EV or hybrid is probably the route to go down. But EVs do have a bit of a problem, and it's not one we currently seem to have an answer to. The Mirai may be that. Over the last years, we have seen a dramatic increase in the number of green zones. They've had them in Germany for a long time, and now we're getting a lot more of them here in Britain too, and I know other markets are also seeing them. These are areas where sometimes modern petrol and diesel cars are still permitted, but very often older ones, especially diesels, are either not allowed at all or allowed but have to pay a fairly hefty surcharge. If you happen to live and do most of your miles in an urban area, a straight-up electric car is still the best choice. Those are most efficient when driving around town. They'll get their most miles driving around London rather than on the M1. Very counterintuitive, I know, but that is how they work. Particularly if you're able to charge at home, you will be able to reap the rewards of much lower running costs compared with a traditional vehicle. This is one area where the hydrogen car simply cannot compete. To fill this costs more or less the same as putting in a tank of petrol or diesel. So it's about 70 quid. That may be a little less than some people are currently paying to fill their car, but it's not really different enough to really make it worthwhile buying one for the fuel savings alone. However, there are a few extremely good reasons why I think hydrogen fuel cell technology should not be considered a dead end, and why I think Toyota are not mad to be spending the money they are in developing it. At a recent motor industry event, as you might imagine, much of the talk was regarding the rapid rise of electric cars, and they said that the range of the vehicles now on offer was much greater than it was only a little while ago. This means that range anxiety is actually not so much of a concern anymore. What is, though, is charging anxiety. Being able to do 250 to 300 miles to a tank, I think means that most people aren't too worried about getting from A to B. The problem is, when you've got to your destination, is there a charging point available? How long is it going to charge? And how much is it going to cost? Now, of course, hydrogen isn't a fix to all of these problems, but there is one way it is infinitely better than a regular electric car, and that is in charging time, because to fill the tank on this doesn't really take any longer than it would with a petrol or diesel. That means whereas with any other car it could take you an hour or two at a fast charging point, or 8 to 12 for a slow one, you can get your 300 or 400 miles out of this in about 5 minutes. Now, for the average person that buys and drives their own car for personal use, this is probably still a little bit of an awkward halfway house, particularly here and now. However, there are a huge number of vehicles on the road today that would really benefit from this technology. Taxis, buses, vans, lorries, all that sort of stuff. The kind of vehicles that can't really afford to be off the road for 2 or 3 hours while they're charging. The kind of vehicles that will regularly do 300, 400, 500 miles every single day, every week. Vehicles that are used fairly intensively, that don't really worry so much about the fact it costs a little bit extra to fill it up, are happy to pay that for the fact you can fill it up quickly, but also require a zero emission vehicle. And in terms of emissions, as David mentioned, all you'll ever get out the back of this is water. Not only that, but this kind of technology also gets you around what is, for me, one of the most troublesome elements of electric vehicles, the batteries. I have no problem with the motors. I quite like electric motors. For this kind of car, they are brilliant, but batteries are not that nice. Let's be honest, let's not skirt around the issue. There are a whole heap of unanswered questions out there about where do these things come from? How exactly are they sourced? What is the cost to them? Not just financial, but environmental, humanitarian. How much damage exactly are we doing in the name of saving the planet? I'm filming for YouTube.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Can we be on it?
You probably are on it now. Because this car doesn't have an enormous battery pack in it, none of those things are really a concern. Even better than that, you can sit nice and low in it. The batteries haven't taken up loads and loads of space. They haven't added masses of weight to the car. This morning, one of the headlines I read in the motoring press was that Bentley are currently lobbying the EU to try and change the laws on what kind of vehicle you're allowed to drive with a regular license. This may shock some of my American viewers, but here in Britain and Europe, you're only allowed to drive a car weighing 3.5 tons, that's just over 7,000 pounds, on a regular license. Even a far less opulent electric car, the Audi e-tron, weighs 2.75 tons. That's 3/4 tons more than this. That's mad. What kind of damage is that going to do to the roads? What happens then if you get in an accident with it? I'm sure by now you've also seen the many videos of what exactly happens when an electric car catches fire. It's not good, is it? Yes, I am, of course, aware that hydrogen is also rather flammable, but there isn't enough of it in here to keep the thing burning for 4 days. We're now heading on to the M25, otherwise known as Britain's largest car park, which shockingly is moving. And I'll show you what the acceleration is like. So we're going 45 mile an hour, foot down, 50, 60, and there's the speed limit. It's comfortable, it's quiet, it's refined, and probably most important for some, because it is zero harmful emissions, not strictly zero emissions, you even get to wear the green plate of piousness. I fully believe that a problem as big as the environment and transport requires more than one solution. For me, a sensible future is one that employs electric cars, combustion engines, and technology like hydrogen fuel cells in the situations where they're most appropriate. Toyota's commitment to the technology is one they're taking very seriously. The word Mirai means future in Japanese, and it's a future Toyota want to see realised. A piece of it has arrived already. In London, the eco-minded cab firm Green Tomato Cars has a fleet of 50 Mirai, and between them, they've covered more than 1 million miles already. A fuel cell-powered bus is also currently in development, and Toyota have even given the technology to railway companies. Heavy haulage would see massive benefits as the weight savings of a fuel cell over a battery means there's more capacity for goods as well as lower downtime. A fuel cell-powered HGV is currently undergoing testing. Hydrogen combustion race cars will be on track this year, and last year a Mirai set the world record for a single fill zero emission journey, with 845 miles of travel achieved from one 5-minute hydrogen fill. In Southern California, where the record was set, they passed 12 hydrogen filling stations on their journey, so they are out there. Fuel cell tech also makes massive sense for any business with a fleet of vehicles, from Addison Lee to Amazon. The hope is that businesses will have a hydrogen depot the public can access, and by this method, the network of hydrogen filling stations could grow rapidly, as we've already seen in the last few years with electric car charging. A hydrogen filling station can even generate fuel by taking hydrogen out of water by electrolysis, meaning the concept of ferrying huge amounts of explosive gas around the world isn't even necessary. This could also mean for particularly remote areas that setting up a hydrogen station could be logistically easier than an EV one. The stations themselves can even be powered by green energy, such as solar. Naturally, as an emerging tech, there is no set way to do things, but the possibilities are very exciting. Perhaps the greatest achievement of the Mirai for me, in some weird way, is just how unexciting it is to drive. It's just a car, and for something that sounds so radical, feels like it might be a prototype, that is quite an achievement. That, I think, is probably all I have to say about the Toyota Mirai. I want to say a huge thank you to Toyota GB for allowing me to come down, showing me around the car and explaining it to me in a way that meant I could understand it. Hopefully that's been the case for you as well. Please do comment down below whether it has or hasn't been. And if you wouldn't mind sharing this video with your friends, hopefully one day I'll actually get my go in the LFA. Unless you've got one and I can drive that one, in which case I'll do that. So, thanks to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you all for the next one. Bye-bye.